discourage Canadians from using carbon fuels in order to, I mean, if you're paying the tax and you want to save money because it's getting too expensive, then presumably you're going to reduce your fuel consumption or your energy consumption. I think that that's a kooky thing to run into, and let me tell you why. I think it's a kooky position to take. Let me tell you why, Nick. Canada, assuming that you agree with the whole theory of man-made global warming, man-made climate change, Canada produces somewhere in the order of 1.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis in the world. 1.5%. Now, in that 1.5%, people have said, yeah, but on a per capita basis, we're producing somewhere around number 3 in the world. And my response to that has been, that doesn't mean that we're actually irresponsible when it comes to our carbon footprint. And again, I'm just using these terms for the sake of argument. On the contrary, I think it shows how extraordinarily environmentally conscientious Canadians are. Because people tend to forget, including Canadians who never travel in this country for real, they tend to forget how big this country is, how spread out the major metropolitan areas are, how far they are from one another, and how cold it is. Canada is the second largest country in the world, in case our listeners need reminding. It happens to be, on average, the coldest country in the world, and it's one of the least populated countries in the world, with, as I say, urban centers being immensely far from one another. You know, if you want to fly from Ottawa to Vancouver, you're talking 4.5, 5 hours thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long way. So my response to this is, we're only number 3 in per capita energy consumption? I'm shocked. I would have guessed, if somebody said to me, guess what your per capita consumption is and where you rank in the world, I would have thought we were up there at number 1.
You would think, and part of the game here is they try to bring it down per capita. Well, that in a game like this, that doesn't matter. That's like saying, soldier to soldier, Canada can beat any army in the world. Well, it'd be nice to think that, but reality is, are you going to go up against Chinese? Because they're a massive number. The mass of the number counts. Because it doesn't matter how good the Chinese are, they'll just overwhelm you with numbers. Doesn't matter how good we are, they just overwhelm you with numbers. It's the same thing here. Who cares about per capita in this case? It's total output of the whole country if you're going to play this game that matters. Okay. And we, as you point out, only produce 1.5% of the total, because in no other area do they do it per capita. They always look at, well, the U.S. puts out, and China puts out, and China puts out, or India puts out. And it's always they're talking about the gross tonnage of CO2 gas. It's never per capita. The only time they use it is when they realize they have no argument. So they try to break it down into bits and pieces that they can defend.
Okay, but I want to go back to the point that I was trying to make. I haven't quite finished it yet.
I'm sorry.
And that is so the response on the part of the federal Liberal Party is, we're going to tax carbon fuel usage, carbon energy usage. Okay, so it's this carbon tax, and it's complicated. I don't want to get into that hole. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole on trying to explain how carbon taxes work. What I want to say is that the sensible and I think conservative response should be to point out how little we're actually producing in this country and how incredibly responsible Canadians are, environmentally speaking, as evidenced by the fact that we are only the third, not the first, on a per capita basis. I think that's incredible. And so we don't need to play the carbon reduction game. And even if we had zero carbon emissions in Canada, it's not going to make a difference because we just don't produce enough to make a difference. It's negligible when it comes to the consumption or to the production of greenhouse gases worldwide. So we should not be worried about reducing Canadians' consumption of fossil fuels. It's not a problem. It's not a problem for Canada. It's not a problem for the world. And if indeed all of this stuff is producing climate change, and again, I'm only saying that for the sake of argument, because I don't agree with human-induced climate change. I don't agree with that. But let's assume for the sake of argument that we all agree on it. There's nothing we can do about it in Canada. So what should be our position in Canada? And that should be to basically adapt to whatever changes are occurring in the environment. There are things that we could do in order to provide Canadians with a certain amount of security in light of climate change. That would be a reasonable position for the Conservatives to take.
Well,
but they haven't taken it. What they've done is they've basically said, we agree with the Liberals on climate change.
Well,
okay?
If it was...
Just a second, let me finish now. We agree with the Liberals on climate change. And not only that, even though we're not talking about a carbon tax, we are still talking about carbon pricing, and we are talking about regulatory changes to compel companies to reduce their carbon consumption. And I'm going, but that's exactly what the Liberals are doing. The only difference is they want to do it through a tax on carbon usage, and you want to do it through, I'm not really sure what carbon pricing is, if not a tax. Call it what you will. And so it's another example of how the Conservative Party is almost lockstep with the Liberal Party, and with some minor cosmetic differences in terms of their response to whatever the situation is, whatever the problem is, the latest crisis is that the Liberals are claiming that we have to respond to. So I just think it's another illustration of the similarity of the two political parties, and more importantly, the leadership of the two political parties. And I say that broadly. I'm not just pointing to Justin Trudeau and Aaron O'Toole. I'm talking about the whole leadership structure, the leadership establishment of both political parties.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind when I look at this, if the Conservatives were really interested in giving Justin Trudeau a run for his money, they don't need to get complicated. All they'd have to do, let's take the environment, as you laid it out, is say, look, what we're worried about is clean water, clean land, and clean air. That's our environmental policy. We'll do whatever it takes to make those things better. And most people will go, that makes sense, because and have somebody stand up and make the argument that you just made. We only produce 1.5% of the world's global gaseous emissions, so there's no point us trying to mitigate something we don't have any control over anyway. So let's adapt rather than try to stop something that's beyond our control. Right. It's like the difference between putting on, standing in front of a train, putting your hand up, trying to stop it, or getting on the train and helping the engineer slowly slow it down. Adaptation is always a better plan, especially in this case, than it is to try to be Superman and stop a train dead in its tracks. Good luck with that. It just doesn't work. So I can't agree with you more about the lack of difference. And it isn't just environment. That's just one area. You can pick any one you want. Like, what's the immigration policy by the Tories with the amount of people we have coming over the borders? Are they doing anything to bolster our own native birth rate? Are they doing any? Because you realize if they had done this 20 years ago, we'd have a whole new crop of native-born Canadians ready to step into the marketplace. But no, they never wanted to entertain that idea. And where are they getting people from? Like, let's go to countries like Australia, New Zealand, England, some of the Western European countries where traditionally we have that common Judeo-Christian ethic that would blend perfectly into Canada's mosaic, instead of from people where they don't know anything about us, don't know anything about our lifestyle, have a completely different outlook on life. Like, I'm not against them individually, and I would not turn people away because they don't see the world the same way I do. But as a policy, let's go to London, let's go to Melbourne, let's go to Christchurch, and say, look, if you want to live someplace else, we can sure use you.
Yeah, well, frankly, I don't know enough about the Conservative Party's immigration policy to be able to comment on it intelligently, but I think that itself is a pretty good indication that there probably isn't a whole lot of difference.
Well, I was going to say the same thing.
Between the two.
Because you don't know anything, you haven't heard any difference, it's because there isn't any. There's nothing to talk about.
No, there isn't a significant difference. There may be a difference in terms of the actual number of people that we're bringing into the country, but that's it. And I'm certainly not, as with you, Nick, I'm not anti-immigrant. And although I would say this, I'm not entirely sure that the Judeo-Christian ethic that you've referred to is necessarily as strong and prevalent in some of those Western European countries that you've referred to. So it could very well be that when you're bringing in people from other countries that may not necessarily be nominally Christian countries, that in many respects, well, certainly from a Western European point of view, I just don't think that they're necessarily that they qualify based on that particular criteria. You're probably better off going to the Philippines and those places.
Okay, fine.
And maybe South America and maybe even Africa.
Sure.
There's a very strong Catholic community in Africa. I know that may not be a very politically correct thing to point out right now.
It's just the truth.
But you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
In other words, I guess what we have to do, if I was running the Conservative Party, I would look at my immigration policy, whatever it is, and say, immigration is not for the immigrant, it's for the country. And we will bring in people that are going to benefit the country. And we don't care where they come from, what they look like, or what they believe in. As long as they're good people and have role models, or not role models, but can be good members of society. Here's a classic case. I had a student last week when I was out doing driver training. The lady was 29 or 30. She studied medicine in Peru, went to the United States, finished off her studies there, spent 10 years in the U.S. working in hospitals down there, came to Canada, and now she's working, was it a PSW? It wasn't. She was trying to write exams and trying to get accreditation in Canada, and we're crying for family doctors. Here's a family doctor. All she wants to do is practice. It's going to cost her $15,000 to write the exams and to get her certificate so she can be a family doctor. If I was running things, I say, look, the exams won't cost you anything. You do 1 year internship under the observation of a Canadian doctor. At the end of that year, if he thinks you're qualified, he signs off. You write the test, you pass. No fees at all. And we're going to bring you in. The only condition is you're going to have to go for the first 5 years where we tell you to go, so that some of these underserved communities can get family doctors. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense than the way we do it now?
Well, there's a lot of things that would make more sense if you applied, some of that common sense to them, and this is one of them. So, but that would be provincial jurisdiction for the most part.
But you could encourage it on the federal side of things by tinkering around with the transfer payments.
I suppose there are things that could be done.